Before sunrise, a small-town veterinarian follows faint cries in the dirt and drags out 12 trembling puppies, wrapped, sedated, still breathing. The wealthy kennel owner calls it mercy. The vet calls it a lie. When a by-the-book animal officer steps in, the pushback hits hard. Rumors, threats, a blackout at the clinic. Then a tiny clue under the gauze, an anesthetic scent that shouldn't be there, turns suspicion into terror. Files vanish. A midnight break-in fails. And as smoke rises from a sudden blaze, the vet has seconds to choose. Run, or fight for the voiceless. Because this isn't an accident, it's a machine, and it's aimed right at anyone who asks questions. What secret is buried with those puppies? And when the trap snaps shut, who survives, who breaks, and who finally pays? Dr. Calder Pike's hands trembled as he examined the first puppy under the harsh fluorescent lights of his clinic. The little creature's breathing was shallow but steady, its body limp from whatever drugs Braddock had used. Mud still clung to its cream-colored fur despite his best efforts to clean it. "Easy there, little one," he murmured, checking vital signs. His stethoscope picked up a strong heartbeat, which eased some of his worry. Behind him, in makeshift beds of towels and blankets, the other 11 puppies lay in various states of awakening. The clock on the wall read 4:30 in the morning. His muscles ached from the frantic digging, and his clothes still carried the damp earth's musty smell. But exhaustion would have to wait. A soft whimper drew his attention to one of the other puppies starting to stir. Moving quickly, he filled syringes with fluids to combat dehydration. The memory of Braddock's cold smile made his jaw clench. "Virus, my foot," he muttered, noting clear signs of deliberate sedation. After 15 years as a vet, he knew the difference between sick animals and drugged ones. These puppies were healthy, except for what had been done to them. The bell above the clinic's front door chimed. Sarah, his morning assistant, rushed in early, her eyes wide. "Dr. Pike, I came as soon as I heard. Mrs. Henderson called me. She saw you bringing in all those puppies. Is it true what they're saying about Braddock's kennel?" Calder carefully set down his instruments. "What exactly are they saying?" "That you caught him burying puppies alive." Sarah's voice shook with anger. She hurried over to help, immediately checking on the still unconscious animals. "News travels fast in small towns," Calder said grimly. He watched another puppy beginning to wake, its legs twitching. Though I'm not surprised Braddock's story is already making rounds. "He's telling everyone they had parvovirus," Sarah said, her lips pressed thin. "Says you're interfering with proper quarantine procedures." Calder snorted. "Convenient explanation. Except these puppies don't show a single symptom of parvo. They're just sedated, heavily." He gestured to their pink gums and clear eyes. "Look for yourself." The front door chimed again. This time Deputy Wilson stepped in, looking uncomfortable in his crisp uniform. "Morning, Dr. Pike. Got a complaint from Mr. Braddock about stolen property?" "These animals weren't property being disposed of, Deputy," Calder said evenly, continuing his work. "They were being buried alive. I have evidence of sedation, and I'm documenting everything." The deputy shifted his weight. "Look, Doc, nobody wants trouble here. Mr. Braddock's an important man in the county. Says he was following proper procedures for diseased animals." "Then he won't mind me running tests to confirm that diagnosis," Calder replied, his voice hard. "Since it's all proper procedure." "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Deputy Wilson warned. "Some folks are already talking about your judgment, bringing potentially infected animals into town." Calder straightened to his full height, meeting the deputy's gaze. "My judgment is fine. My conscience is clear. Can everyone involved in this say the same?" The deputy flushed. Just trying to keep peace, Doc. You might want to think about the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is 12 innocent animals nearly murdered, Calder said quietly. And I'm thinking about it plenty. After the deputy left, Sarah touched Calder's arm. They'll make things difficult for you, won't they? Probably. He turned his attention back to the puppies, some now fully awake and whimpering. But I've dealt with difficult before. His phone buzzed, a text from Braddock himself. Last chance to do this the easy way. Don't be foolish. Calder deleted the message without responding. The morning sun was starting to peek through the windows, catching the silver in his hair as he bent to comfort a trembling puppy. He'd seen enough death in his military days to last several lifetimes. He wasn't about to stand by and watch it happen here. Not in his town. Not to creatures who couldn't defend themselves. Sarah worked quietly beside him, helping document every detail of the puppy's condition. They both knew this was just the beginning. Braddock's influence ran deep in the county, and he wasn't a man who took defiance lightly. But as Calder watched the puppies slowly coming back to life, their tails beginning to wag, their eyes brightening, he felt the familiar steel in his spine that had guided him through war zones and operating rooms. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Get me the state veterinary board's number, he told Sarah, and check if any of our security cameras caught what happened at the kennel this morning. His voice was steady, determined. We're going to need everything documented. The morning light strengthened, warming the clinic's worn floors. Outside, another day in small-town Texas was beginning, but inside these walls, Calder knew a battle line had been drawn. He'd crossed a powerful man to save 12 innocent lives. Now he would have to see it through, whatever came next. The morning sun climbed higher as Calder methodically checked each puppy's vital signs. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, born from years of both battlefield medicine and veterinary work. The clinic's familiar antiseptic smell mixed with the earthy scent of damp fur as he worked. Sarah, get me another set of warming blankets, he called out, and the vitamin B complex injections. While Sarah hurried to comply, Calder pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd come to trust over the years. After 3 rings, a crisp voice answered. Marin Keene. Marin, it's Calder Pike. I need you at the clinic. Found something at Braddock's kennel you should see. There was a pause on the line. How bad? 12 puppies, buried alive, sedated. His words were clipped, controlled. Jesus, Marin's breath hitched. I'll be there in 15. True to her word, Marin arrived 14 minutes later, her animal control officer's badge glinting at her hip. Her green eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. Puppies in various stages of recovery scattered across examination tables and warming beds. I've been trying to nail Braddock for months, she said, pulling out her notebook. Every time I get close to building a case, evidence disappears. Witnesses change their stories. My supervisor suddenly needs me on other assignments. Calder watched her document the puppy's conditions. You think he's got people in your department? I think he's got people everywhere. Marin's pen moved steadily across the page. Half the county board owns shares in his operations. The other half owes him favors. The clinic door burst open as Nora Lee Martinez rushed in, still pulling on her scrubs. Dr. Pike, sorry I'm late. Traffic was crazy and... She stopped short at the sight of the puppies. Oh my God. Nora, I need you to help monitor their temperatures, Calder directed. Some are still running low from being in that wet ground. His phone buzzed again, an email this time. His jaw tightened as he read it. Braddock's lawyers just filed an emergency injunction, he said. They're claiming I've created a public health crisis by bringing potentially infected animals into town without proper quarantine procedures. That's ridiculous, Sarah protested. These puppies aren't sick." "Doesn't matter," Marin said grimly. "He's got judges who'll sign anything he puts in front of them. We need hard evidence, not just our word against his." Nora worked quietly, changing out soiled gauze pads. Suddenly she frowned, bringing one closer to her nose. "Dr. Pike, these smell funny, not like regular antiseptic." Calder took the gauze, inhaling carefully. There was something there, faint but chemical. He'd smelled something similar in combat hospitals, but it didn't belong here. "Get me a fresh pair of gloves," he told Nora. With practiced care, he examined the nearest puppy's neck, parting the fur. There. Pattern of puncture marks, too precise to be accidental. His military medical training kicked in. He knew what he was looking at, but it shouldn't exist. Not here. Not in a small-town kennel. Marin stepped closer. "What is it?" Calder caught her eye and gave a slight shake of his head. Too many windows. Too many possibilities for watching eyes. "Just checking injection sites," he said loudly. "Standard procedure." She understood immediately, tucking her notebook away. "I should get back to the office. File my initial report. Keep me updated?" "Of course." They shared a look of perfect understanding. The day progressed with a steady stream of regular appointments between monitoring the recovering puppies. Calder kept his discovery to himself, but his mind raced with implications. The puncture pattern suggested systematic testing, the kind that required resources, connections, and protection from oversight. By late afternoon, his phone had accumulated 6 missed calls from Braddock's lawyers and another thinly veiled threat from an anonymous number. Sarah handled the front desk with determined cheer, deflecting curious questions from clients who'd heard the morning's gossip. "Bloodwork's back," Nora announced quietly, holding out a folder. "Everything looks normal except—" "Except?" Calder prompted. "There's something off about the protein markers. I've never seen readings quite like these." Calder nodded, keeping his face neutral. "File it with the others. Make copies. Keep one set here, one at home." The wisdom of that precaution proved itself an hour later when 2 health department officials arrived, demanding to inspect the clinic's quarantine protocols. Their badges seemed legitimate, but Calder noticed how their eyes lingered too long on his filing cabinets. "Everything's in order," he told them pleasantly, showing them only the standard isolation ward. "Though I'm surprised you got here so quickly. Usually takes days to process a complaint." "We take potential outbreaks very seriously," one said smoothly. Too smoothly. After they left, Calder gathered his staff. "From now on, nothing leaves this building without my direct approval. No records, no samples, nothing. Clear?" They nodded, sensing the gravity in his tone. Sarah spoke up hesitantly. "Dr. Pike, are we in trouble?" He looked at each of them. Sarah's worried face, Nora's determined expression. Good people who trusted him. "Not yet," he said carefully. "But stay alert. And if anyone asks you questions about this morning, direct them to me." The puppies were improving steadily, some even playing weakly with each other. Watching them, Calder felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He'd sworn an oath once, in dusty field hospitals, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That oath hadn't ended with his military service. But as he looked out at the Texas sunset painting the clinic parking lot gold, he knew the real fight was just beginning. Somewhere in this county, in offices and boardrooms he'd never seen, people were already moving against him. The system that should protect the innocent was instead shielding the guilty. He'd have to be careful, methodical. The evidence in those puncture marks told a story that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. For now, he'd play it close to the vest, document everything, and wait for the right moment. The puppies settled into their kennels for the night, safe for now. But Calder knew that safety was temporary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats. He'd face them all, because some fights chose you, and once chosen, there was no walking away. The morning brought an unusual quiet to Calder's normally busy clinic. The waiting room sat empty except for Mrs. Henderson and her ancient tortoiseshell cat. She wouldn't meet his eyes when he called them back. "Heard you've got kennel cough running wild in here," she muttered, clutching her cat carrier closer. "Maybe I should come back another time?" "That's not true, Mrs. Henderson. We maintain strict quarantine protocols." Calder kept his voice steady, professional. "Your cat's diabetes check is important." She hesitated, then followed him inside. But the damage was done. By noon, 3 more regular clients had canceled their appointments. The feed delivery truck that usually arrived Thursdays drove right past the clinic. Sarah came to his office, wringing her hands. "Turner's feed store says they can't supply us anymore. Something about insurance concerns." Calder nodded grimly. "Call marshals in the next county. We'll pay more for delivery, but the animals need their feed." His email inbox filled with official-looking messages. The state veterinary board wanted clarification about his quarantine procedures. The county health department scheduled another routine inspection. An insurance adjuster needed to review his coverage. The phone rang. Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom. "Dr. Pike, Marin Keene is here." Marin strode in, her face tight with concern. "It's starting. They're trying to isolate you." "Already noticed." Calder gestured at his computer screen. "Apparently, I'm now a public health menace." "Document everything," Marin said, pulling out her notebook. "Every canceled appointment, every supplier who drops you, every official request. Times, dates, names. We need to establish the pattern." "Pattern of what?" "Coordinated harassment. Braddock has friends in high places, but if we can prove they're acting in concert." She trailed off as Nora knocked and entered with a stack of lab results. "Those blood protein markers you noticed?" Nora said. "I cross-referenced them. There's something else too, about the gauze." Calder's attention sharpened. He pulled out the sealed evidence bags containing the original gauze pads. The chemical smell lingered, distinctive now that he knew to look for it. "Alfexalone," he said quietly, certainty settling like ice in his stomach. "It's an injectable anesthetic, controlled substance, expensive." Marin leaned forward. "Why would a kennel owner have access to that?" "They wouldn't, not legally." Calder's hands clenched. "It's used in research facilities, some high-end veterinary hospitals, not local kennels." The implications hit him like a physical blow. He saw again the neat puncture marks, the precisely spaced injection sites. "They weren't euthanized," he said, his voice rough. "They were sedated, then buried alive." Silence filled the office. Outside, a dog barked in the recovery ward. The sound seemed to come from very far away. "Jesus," Marin whispered. "The dirt in their airways confirms it." Calder's military training helped keep his voice level, but rage burned cold in his chest. "They were breathing when they went into that hole." Nora made a small, horrified sound. Marin's face had gone pale, but her eyes were fierce. "We need to go public with this." "They'll destroy him," Nora protested. "They're already trying." "They'll do worse than that," Marin said grimly. "Braddock's connected. Mayor's office, county commission, probably higher. They'll pull your license, Calder. Everything you've built here, gone." Calder stood, walking to the window. The afternoon sun fell across the empty parking lot where his regular clients should have been. 20 years of building trust in this community, of midnight emergency calls and farmers who paid in installments when times were hard. All of it at risk. He thought of those puppies in the dark earth, struggling to breathe as the sedation wore off. Thought of the kind of people who could do that, who could calculate the doses and timing with cold precision, who could walk away knowing what lay beneath their feet. Truth matters more, he said finally, turning back to face them. If we stay quiet, they'll keep doing it. To other animals, other places. My reputation isn't worth that. Marin nodded, unsurprised. I'll help however I can, but they'll come at you hard. Already are. He gestured at his inbox. But they made a mistake with the alfaxalone. That's not something you use by accident. It leaves a trail, purchase orders, shipping records, prescribing doctors. Somewhere there's paper on this. I can start checking veterinary supply companies, Marin said, making notes. Cross-reference with research facilities in the region. Someone's supplying it. Be careful, Calder warned. If Braddock has the connections you think, they'll be watching. They're already watching. Have been since I started asking questions months ago. She met his eyes steadily. But now I'm not alone. They spent the next hour documenting everything they had. Blood work, tissue samples, the gauze pads, photographs of injection sites. Copies were made, stored in separate locations. Marin would keep one set in her private files. When she left, Calder called his staff together. He laid out the situation plainly. What they'd discovered, what it meant, what was likely coming. Anyone who wants to distance themselves from this, I understand, he finished. No hard feelings. You need to protect yourselves. Sarah straightened her shoulders. My grandmother always said evil wins when good people look away. I'm staying. Nora nodded firmly. Me too. Those puppies can't speak for themselves. We have to. Calder felt a surge of pride in them, mixed with worry. They didn't deserve to be caught in this crossfire. But they'd made their choice, just as he had. In the recovery ward, the rescued puppies were growing stronger. Some wagged their tails now when he approached, learning to trust again despite what humans had done to them. Their resilience amazed him. Truth mattered more than reputation. He'd believed that in the field hospitals, treating wounded civilians regardless of politics or consequences. He believed it now. Let them come. He had evidence, allies, and most importantly, the truth. Sometimes that had to be enough. Through the truck's windshield, flat Texas farmland stretched toward the horizon. Calder gripped the steering wheel while Marin studied a wrinkled map in the passenger seat. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rural road. Turn left at the next crossroad, Marin directed. Sarah Martinez's rescue is about 2 miles down. Calder nodded, his jaw tight. And she lost an entire litter to Braddock? 6 puppies, all supposedly transferred to his rehabilitation program. Marin's fingers made air quotes. She hasn't been able to get straight answers about what happened to them since. The truck bumped down a gravel drive toward a modest farmhouse. Wooden fence posts lined the property, and the sound of barking carried from behind the house. A middle-aged woman in work clothes emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her jeans. That's Sarah, Marin said quietly. She's been running this rescue for 15 years. They stepped out into the dusty yard. Sarah Martinez had kind eyes and worry lines etched deep around her mouth. She greeted Marin with a hug. This is Dr. Pike, Marin said. He's helping me look into some concerns about Braddock's operation. Sarah's expression darkened. Come on back to the kennels. We can talk there. They followed her behind the house, where chain-link runs housed about a dozen dogs. Sarah moved among them with practiced ease, checking water bowls as she spoke. It was back in March. I had this litter of lab mixes, about 4 months old, healthy as could be. Her voice caught. Braddock's people said they had this special program for training rescue dogs, said they'd all go to good homes. Did you see any paperwork? Calder asked. They had forms, looked official enough. She stopped at an empty run. Loading dock receipt, transfer authorization, all of it. But when I tried to follow up a few weeks later, nobody would tell me anything. Just got bounced from person to person until I gave up. Did you notice anything about the transport van? Marin pressed gently. Sarah's hands tightened on the fence. That's what keeps eating at me. It had Braddock's logo, but the number was different from their usual vehicles. And the men... She shook her head. They weren't the regular transport guys I'd seen before. Calder exchanged a look with Marin. Has this happened to other rescues in the area? Talk gets around. Sarah's voice was bitter. Always the same story. Special program, official paperwork, different van. Then the dogs just disappear. She led them to a small office attached to the kennels. Filing cabinets lined one wall, and a desk held stacks of folders. Sarah pulled one out and handed it to Marin. I kept copies of everything. The transfer forms, the vehicle information I wrote down, for all the good it did. While Marin photographed the documents, Calder studied a wall map dotted with pushpins. These all rescue operations? Sarah nodded. Red pins are places that had similar experiences with Braddock. Been adding them as I hear stories. There were too many red pins. Far too many. He's using the disease story as cover, Calder said slowly, pieces clicking into place. Claim the dogs are sick, say they need to be quarantined or euthanized, then they vanish before anyone can verify. But why? Sarah asked. What's he doing with them? Calder thought of those sedated puppies in the ground, of how many others might have been buried in similar holes. His stomach turned. We're going to find out, Marin promised. She squeezed Sarah's arm. Thank you for speaking with us. We'll be in touch. The drive back was quiet, both of them processing what they'd learned. The sun was setting by the time they pulled into the clinic parking lot. I'll start running those transport numbers first thing tomorrow, Marin said as they walked to the door. See if I can trace... She broke off as Calder held up his hand. The front door was slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered locking it when they left. Carefully, he pushed it open. Nothing seemed disturbed in the waiting room. But there, just inside the door, lay a plain white envelope. Calder picked it up with a pen to preserve any prints. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words in block letters. Stop digging. Well, Marin said grimly. Guess Braddock knows we're not backing down. Calder stared at the note, remembering Sarah's wall map with its constellation of red pins, each one representing lost dogs, grieving rescuers, unanswered questions. No, he said. We're not backing down at all. He carefully sealed the note in an evidence bag, while Marin photographed where it had been found. They did a thorough check of the clinic, but nothing else was disturbed. Still, the message was clear. They were being watched. I'll have the lab check for prints, Marin said, but I doubt they'll find any. These people are careful. Too careful, Calder agreed. That's what will trip them up. Eventually. Nobody runs an operation this size without leaving traces somewhere. But as he locked up again and watched Marin drive away, he couldn't shake the chill that had settled over him. The threat was precisely worded, not back off or mind your business, but stop digging. They knew he was investigating, which meant they knew how close he might be getting to whatever ugly truth lay buried beneath Braddock's respectable facade. The question was, how far would they go to keep that truth hidden? The sodium lights in the hospital parking lot cast everything in a sickly orange glow. Marin checked her watch again, 11:45 p.m. Right on time, a figure in scrubs emerged from the staff entrance. Thanks for meeting so late, Jenny, Marin said quietly as the nurse approached her car. Jenny glanced around the empty lot before sliding into the passenger seat. I can't stay long, but what I saw at Braddock's, it needs to come out. She pulled a phone from her pocket with slightly trembling hands. I worked night shift there for 3 months last year. Started noticing things that didn't add up. Marin leaned closer as Jenny scrolled through photos. The first showed a large waste disposal truck backing up to Braddock's kennel loading dock at 2 a.m. No markings on the truck, Jenny explained. No company name, no permits displayed. They came twice a week, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. More photos followed. Workers in dark clothing loading heavy black bags, a clipboard with partial shipping manifests, different angles of the unmarked trucks. I started documenting everything after I found those manifests didn't match our actual medical waste volumes. Jenny's voice was barely above a whisper. The numbers were way too high, and the disposal company listed doesn't exist. Marin carefully copied the photos to her own phone. Did you ever see what was in the bags? Jenny shook her head. But I heard things, sometimes movement, and once sounds. She wrapped her arms around herself. I quit the next day. After Jenny left, Marin sat in her car making detailed notes. The pieces were starting to form a pattern, but they needed more. Across town, Calder stood on the porch of a sprawling ranch house, steeling himself before knocking. Judge Marshall had retired 3 years ago, but his influence still carried weight. The door opened to reveal a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes. Dr. Pike, been a while? Yes, sir. I hope I'm not disturbing you too late. Marshall waved him in. You saved my Lucy when everyone else said to put her down. My door's always open to you. In the study, surrounded by legal texts and family photos, Calder carefully laid out what they'd discovered. The judge listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Braddock's got friends in high places, Marshall said finally. But if what you're suggesting is true, no amount of influence can protect him. He pulled out a business card. Call this number. Tomorrow. Ask for Agent Chen. Tell her I sent you. Meanwhile, Marin had tracked down Tony Reeves, a feed delivery driver whose route included Braddock's property. His logs showed regular deliveries to storage silos that, according to county records, didn't exist. Never felt right, Tony told her, spreading out his route sheets. Extra stops that weren't on the official manifests. Always had to park behind the main buildings, out of sight. He pointed to a series of entries. See these times? Way too long for normal feed drops, and the amounts never matched what was actually loaded on my truck. Back at the clinic, the recovered puppies had become living proof of Braddock's operation. Their blood work showed traces of the sedative. Their wounds matched the burial pattern. Each one represented evidence that couldn't be buried or denied. Calder began spending nights at the clinic, setting up a cot in his office. The puppies needed regular monitoring anyway, he told himself. But the real reason was the growing knot of worry in his gut. They were accumulating too much evidence for Braddock to ignore. He installed security cameras, added extra locks, kept detailed records of every visitor and phone call. The puppies grew stronger each day, their playful barks now filling the recovery ward. Looking at them, Calder could hardly believe they were the same lifeless bodies he'd pulled from that makeshift grave. One night, while checking their charts, he heard Marin's car pull up. She hurried in carrying a thick folder. The waste company Jenny photographed, she said without preamble. It's registered to a shell corporation. Guess who owns the holding company that owns the shell? Braddock? Through 3 layers of paperwork, but yes. She spread out documents across his desk. And those unmarked silos Tony mentioned? They're not on any official plans, but satellite images show they were built last year. Calder studied the photos. Perfect way to move things without questions. Feed trucks in, waste trucks out. Who looks twice at a kennel getting deliveries? It's a whole network, Marin said. The kennels, the transport vans, the disposal routes, all connected, all hidden in plain sight. One of the puppies wandered over, tail wagging. Calder scratched its ears, remembering how still these same paws had been just weeks ago. They're not just evidence now, Marin said softly, watching him with the pup. They're survivors, witnesses. Calder nodded. The puppies were living proof of both the cruelty they were fighting and the hope they were fighting for. Every tail wag, every playful bark was a testament to resilience, to the possibility of justice. He settled back into his office chair, knowing another long night of guard duty lay ahead. But looking at the sleeping puppies in their kennels, hearing their peaceful breathing, he knew it was worth every sleepless hour. They had the pieces now, the waste trucks, the hidden silos, the falsified papers. Soon they would have enough to bring down Braddock's entire operation. The puppies would make sure of that. They just had to keep them safe long enough to make it count. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when a black SUV pulled into the clinic's parking lot, tires crunching deliberately on the gravel. A man in a crisp navy suit stepped out, clipboard in hand, his polished shoes reflecting the early light. His badge, prominently displayed on his lapel, identified him as Dennis Reeves, County Health Inspector. The timing, before business hours, sent an immediate warning signal through the clinic. "Routine audit," he announced, brushing past Nora at the front desk with a dismissive glance. His eyes darted around the waiting room with predatory intensity, cataloging every detail like a hawk searching for prey. "Need to see your controlled substances log, equipment maintenance records, and disposal protocols. Immediately." Calder felt his jaw tighten, a muscle twitching beneath his weathered skin. In 15 years of practice, he'd never had a random inspection arrive before business hours, especially one conducted with such obvious purpose. But he kept his voice steady, deliberately neutral. "Of course. Right this way." For 3 grueling hours, Reeves combed through every file, every cabinet, every corner of the clinic with meticulous hostility. He swabbed surfaces with exaggerated care, photographed kennels from multiple angles, and made endless notes in tight, aggressive handwriting. His questions grew increasingly pointed, each one carrying the weight of implied accusation. "These recovery protocols seem unusual," Reeves said, tapping his pen against a chart with rhythmic impatience. The sound echoed in the silent examination room. "And your oxygen delivery schedule is quite heavy for a clinic this size. Excessive, one might say." "We handle complex surgeries," Calder replied, meeting the man's gaze without flinching. His gray eyes remained steady despite the churning in his gut. "Better to have too much than not enough when an animal's life is at stake." Reeves smiled thinly, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. Indeed. That afternoon, the weekly oxygen delivery arrived, the delivery driver unusually hurried and avoiding eye contact. Calder was checking a puppy's stitches, his fingers gentle against the soft fur, when alarms started blaring from the recovery ward. The harsh electronic wailing sent a spike of adrenaline through his system. The monitors showed dropping oxygen levels despite full tanks, impossible unless something was terribly wrong. "Something's wrong!" Nora shouted, her normally composed face tight with panic. She gestured frantically at the plummeting numbers on the digital displays. "The animals aren't getting enough air! The levels keep falling!" Calder rushed to inspect the tanks, heart hammering against his ribs. The gauges showed full, but when he checked the valves with experienced fingers, he found tiny metal shavings scattered across the metal fittings. Someone had deliberately damaged them, ensuring a slow leak that could have killed every animal in recovery. The sabotage was subtle, professional, and unmistakably intentional. "Get the backup tanks," he ordered, voice cutting through the alarm's wail. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the implications hit him. "Move everyone to the examination rooms, now!" They worked frantically, adrenaline driving their movements as they relocated recovering animals, while Calder hooked up emergency oxygen. Puppies whimpered in confusion as they were transferred, delicate IV lines carefully preserved during the hurried move. By the time they finished, his shirt was soaked with sweat, dark patches spreading across his back and chest, but every patient was breathing normally again, safe from the invisible threat. "This wasn't an accident," he told Marin when she arrived to document the sabotage, her green eyes narrowing as she examined the damaged equipment. He handed her one of the valves, the metal edges suspiciously scored. "Those valves were tampered with before delivery. Look at the cut pattern. Systematic, not random wear." "Braddock's getting desperate," she agreed, photographing the damaged equipment from multiple angles, her movements quick and precise. The camera flash illuminated the tiny metal shavings. "He knows we're close to exposing him. This is sloppy. He's showing fear." That night, Calder sat in his darkened office, the blue glow from his computer screen illuminating his tired face as he reviewed security footage. The soft snoring of puppies from the recovery ward provided a gentle backdrop that steadied his nerves until a deafening crash shattered the silence, making him jolt upright. Glass sprayed across his desk like deadly confetti as a brick sailed through the window, narrowly missing his head. Calder ducked instinctively, heart hammering against his ribs, the sudden explosion of violence shocking after the quiet night. When he finally straightened, brushing shards from his sleeve, he found a note wrapped around the brick, secured with rough twine. "Last warning. Back off or the next message won't be so gentle." The handwriting was blocky, deliberately disguised. The puppies were whimpering now, their distressed cries rising in volume, disturbed by the noise. Calder checked each one methodically, soothing them with gentle words and touches, his large hands surprisingly delicate against their small bodies. As he calmed them, his initial fear hardened into something stronger, more determined. Each innocent face he tended strengthened his resolve. "We're not backing down," he whispered to the smallest pup, a fragile bundle of white fur who licked his hand trustingly, tiny pink tongue warm against his skin. "We're going to fight harder. They don't get to win this one." The next morning, Calder called a security company, arranging for immediate installation. By sunset, high-resolution cameras covered every angle of the clinic, inside and out, their red indicator lights glowing like watchful eyes. Motion sensors guarded the windows, ready to trigger at the slightest disturbance, and electronic locks secured all entries with reinforced deadbolts and magnetic seals. "It's like Fort Knox in here," Nora observed, as the technicians finished the installation, testing the alarm system with a series of short, sharp beeps. She ran her fingers along one of the newly installed door frames, feeling the solid security beneath her touch. "That's the idea," Calder replied, checking the feed on his phone, multiple camera angles displayed in a grid pattern. But he knew physical security wasn't enough against an enemy with Braddock's resources. He needed to protect his evidence, the puppies themselves, in a way that couldn't be tampered with or erased. Working late into the night under the harsh glow of surgical lights, he carefully implanted a tiny microchip in each puppy, his hand steady despite his exhaustion. The chips weren't just for identification. They contained detailed medical data proving these were the same animals he'd rescued from Braddock's property. Time-stamped evidence that couldn't be altered or destroyed without killing the very animals they were trying to save. "There," he murmured, placing the last pup back in its kennel, checking the small, almost invisible incision one final time. "Try making them disappear now." The puppy yawned and curled up against its siblings, eyes closing trustingly, unaware of its role as living evidence in a dangerous fight. Watching them sleep, their small chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, Calder felt the weight of his choice settle across his shoulders. He could have given in, looked the other way like so many others had when confronted by Braddock's influence. Instead, he'd chosen to fight an opponent who seemed to have endless resources and connections that reached into every corner of county government. But looking at those innocent faces, nestled together for warmth and comfort, he knew he'd made the right decision. Someone had to stand up to Braddock's cruelty, to the systematic abuse that had gone unchallenged for too long. Someone had to prove that compassion was stronger than corruption, that the truth could prevail even against money and influence. The security system beeped softly, a gentle electronic pulse reminding him he wasn't alone in this fight. Somewhere out there, Marin was building her case, gathering evidence and testimonies from others who'd witnessed Braddock's operations. Judge Marshall's federal contact was investigating, working through channels Braddock couldn't reach or intimidate. And here in the clinic, 12 tiny survivors were sleeping peacefully, each one a testament to resilience and hope, each one carrying proof of Braddock's crimes beneath their skin. Calder settled into his office chair for another night of watchful waiting, the security monitors casting blue shadows across his tired face. Let Braddock send his inspectors and saboteurs. Let him try to intimidate and threaten with bricks through windows and tampered equipment. The truth would come out, one way or another. And when it did, those puppies would help ensure justice was finally served, not just for them, but for all the animals that hadn't survived Braddock's cruelty. The moon cast long shadows through the clinic windows as Calder made his final rounds. The security system's gentle hum had become oddly comforting over the past few nights. He paused to check on the puppies, now strong enough to tumble and play together in their enclosure. At exactly midnight, the lights went dead. The security system's steady beep fell silent. Calder's military training kicked in instantly. He grabbed his phone, but there was no signal. Someone had cut both power and communications. Heavy footsteps crunched on gravel outside. Calder moved silently through the darkness toward the storage room where he kept emergency supplies. His hand found the tranquilizer gun by touch, loaded with enough sedative to drop a full-grown horse. The clinic's back door creaked. Calder's heart pounded as he heard multiple sets of boots moving with purpose through the building. These weren't ordinary thieves. They knew exactly where they were going. "Check the recovery ward," a muffled voice ordered. "Get those mutts and let's go." A flashlight beam swept the hallway. Calder pressed himself against the wall, counting footsteps. 2 intruders, both moving with professional precision. They wore dark clothes and ski masks, their movements suggesting military or police training. His phone vibrated, a text from Marin. "Saw lights out, coming in back. 2 men." Calder's mind raced. The puppies were in the central ward. He needed to delay the intruders until backup arrived. His eyes fell on the heavy metal cattle gate they used for larger animals. Perfect. Moving quickly but quietly, he dragged the gate across the hallway leading to the recovery ward. The metal bars would make an effective barrier. "They're not here!" one of the masked men called out. "Keep looking," the other growled. "Boss wants them gone tonight." Flashlight beams swung wildly as the intruders grew frustrated. Calder heard Marin's soft footsteps in the back hall. He needed to keep the men focused on him. He clicked on his own flashlight, illuminating the hallway. Looking for something? The intruders spun toward him, reaching under their jackets. Calder didn't wait to see if they were drawing weapons. He fired the tranquilizer gun twice in rapid succession. The first shot went wide, but the second caught one of the men in the thigh. He stumbled, cursing. His partner grabbed him, trying to retreat. "Police! Freeze!" Marin's voice rang out as she burst through the back door, her service weapon drawn. The uninjured intruder shoved his drugged companion toward her, buying time, to sprint for the front exit. Marin had to dodge the falling man, letting the other escape. "Got one," she said, keeping her gun trained on the sedated intruder. The man was already feeling the tranquilizer's effects, his movements growing sluggish. As he tried to stand, a cell phone clattered from his pocket. Calder snatched it up while Marin secured the intruder with zip ties. The man was unconscious before she finished. "Police are on their way," Marin said, then noticed Calder staring at the phone's screen. "What is it?" "Text messages," Calder replied, his voice tight with anger. "To and from someone listed as Mitchell, talking about disposal runs and cleanup jobs." Marin looked over his shoulder. "Mitchell's Braddock's foreman. I've seen him supervising late-night shipments." Calder scrolled through more messages, each one revealing pieces of a horrifying pattern. Regular disposals of unwanted animals, coordinated cover-ups, money changing hands to keep inspectors quiet. "This isn't just about these puppies," he said, his hands shaking with rage. "They've been doing this for years. Systematic cruelty hidden behind paperwork and bribes." The police arrived minutes later, their red and blue lights painting the clinic walls. As they took statements and collected evidence, Calder checked on the puppies. They were frightened but unharmed, huddled together in their enclosure. "We'll need that phone for evidence," the lead officer said. Calder had already forwarded the key messages to himself and Marin. "Of course, but you should know. This goes deeper than a simple break-in. These men were sent by Royce Braddock." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "That's a serious accusation, Dr. Pike." "And I can prove it," Calder replied, thinking of the text messages, the injured intruder, and 12 miraculous survivors who should have died in a shallow grave. "This ends now." As the police left with their prisoner, Marin helped Calder reset the power and repair the security system. Neither spoke much. They were both processing the night's revelations and their implications. The puppies had settled back to sleep, their small bodies rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Looking at them, Calder felt his suspicions crystallize into absolute certainty. Braddock wasn't just cruel. He was running an organized operation that treated living creatures as disposable commodities. "What's our next move?" Marin asked quietly. Calder's jaw tightened. "We take everything we've got to people who can't be bought. The cell phone logs, the medical evidence, the witness statements, all of it." The sun was rising by the time they finished securing the clinic. The night's events had changed everything. What started as one act of conscience had exposed a system of calculated cruelty. There would be no more warnings or intimidation attempts. The next move would be all-out war. Morning light filtered through the clinic windows as Marin ran the scanner over one of the rescued puppies. The small black and white mutt wagged its tail, completely unaware of the night's drama. The scanner beeped, displaying a number that made Marin's breath catch. "Calder," she called out, her voice tight. "You need to see this." He walked over from where he'd been checking the clinic's repaired security system. "What is it?" "This chip." Marin scanned the puppy again to be sure. "It's registered to a dog that was supposedly euthanized at Braddock's facility last week. A terrier mix named Buddy." Calder frowned, leaning in to see the scanner's display. "That's impossible, unless they're reusing chips from dead dogs," Marin finished. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the puppy, examining it closer. "This isn't Buddy. He was an adult dog. This pup can't be more than 4 months old." The implications hit them both at the same time. Calder's face went hard as granite. "They're covering their tracks. making it look like dogs were properly euthanized when they were actually being trafficked, Marin said. Or worse. She set the puppy down and pulled out her tablet. I keep digital copies of all county animal control records. Let me check something. Her fingers flew across the screen as she pulled up necropsy reports from the past 6 months. Calder watched over her shoulder as she scrolled through data, looking for patterns. There, she said, pointing to a chemical analysis. Alphoxylone shows up in the tissue samples of 3 other dogs that were supposedly euthanized at Braddock's facility. The same drug you found traces of on the gauze from our rescued puppies. Calder's face went pale. They weren't just disposing of unwanted animals, they were sedating them, declaring them euthanized, then selling them, Marin suggested, or shipping them somewhere else. But why go through all this trouble? Calder ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. Why not just run a legitimate operation? Marin's expression darkened. Because legitimate operations have oversight, records, accountability. She pulled up more files. Look at these numbers. In the past year, Braddock's facility reported euthanizing over 300 animals, but the medical waste disposal records don't match up. They're only showing about a third of what they should be. Calder felt sweat break out on his forehead as the scope of the operation became clear. So 2/3 of those animals disappeared into thin air, Marin finished, or more likely into some kind of trafficking network. She looked up at him, her green eyes fierce. This isn't just animal cruelty anymore. This is organized crime. The puppy they'd scanned wandered over to Calder's feet, pawing at his boots. He picked it up, feeling its warm, living weight in his hands. How many others had been declared dead on paper while being shipped off to God knows where? The transport vans, he said suddenly. The rescue worker we interviewed mentioned seeing Braddock's vans making late-night runs. And your night nurse contact, she documented those waste pickups that didn't add up. Marin was already pulling up more records. The timing matches. Every reported mass euthanasia event corresponds with one of those nighttime transports. Her voice shook with barely contained anger. They've been doing this for years, right under our noses. The puppy in Calder's arms squirmed, trying to lick his face. He thought about how close these 12 had come to disappearing into that system. Buried alive, they would have been just more numbers on a falsified report. Your career, he said quietly to Marin. If we pursue this, Braddock has connections everywhere. The department... To hell with my career, Marin cut him off. Her voice was steel. I became an animal control officer to protect the vulnerable, not to look the other way while criminals abuse the system. She stood up, squaring her shoulders. We have evidence now. Real, solid evidence. The chip numbers, the chemical analysis, the transport records. And the cell phone we got from the intruder, Calder added. Exactly. Marin's determination was palpable. This isn't just about saving 12 puppies anymore. This is about exposing a system that's been treating animals like disposable commodities, that's been falsifying records and probably bribing officials to look the other way. Calder set the puppy down, watching it scamper back to its littermates. Each one of them was living proof of what Braddock had been doing. Each microchip was a piece of evidence that couldn't be explained away. We'll need help, he said. People we can trust completely. This is bigger than just local law enforcement. Marin nodded, already typing on her tablet. I'm documenting everything. Every scan, every test result, every discrepancy in the records. We'll build a case so solid that even Braddock's connections can't bury it. She paused, looking up at Calder with a mix of determination and vulnerability. You know they'll come after us both. Not just with threats this time. This could destroy everything we've built. Calder thought about his clinic, about the years of work he'd put into building his practice. Then he thought about those puppies in the ground, and how many others might have suffered the same fate. "Some things matter more than careers," he said quietly. "You taught me that." A ghost of a smile crossed Marin's face. "Then let's bring it all down. Every last piece of it." She turned back to her tablet, fingers flying as she compiled their evidence. The morning sun grew stronger, filling the clinic with light. In their enclosure, 12 rescued puppies played and tumbled, blissfully unaware that they were now at the center of something much bigger than themselves. Each one was living proof of a terrible truth. Each microchip was a key to unlocking a system of organized cruelty. And in that quiet morning after a night of violence, 2 people committed themselves to seeing justice done, no matter the personal cost. Calder's hands trembled slightly as he spread the photographs across his desk. The night nurse, Sarah Martinez, had delivered them an hour ago, her eyes darting nervously as she handed over the manila envelope. "I kept these hidden," she'd whispered. "Took pictures with my phone whenever I saw the money changing hands." Now those images told their own damning story. Clear shots showed Braddock passing thick envelopes to Dennis Weber, the county's chief permitting officer. The dates stamped on each photo corresponded perfectly with approved permits for kennel expansions and waste disposal variances. Marin leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching. "This is it, the missing piece." She picked up one particularly clear image showing Weber counting bills in his car. Money trails don't lie. The retired judge, Harrison Mills, adjusted his reading glasses as he examined the evidence. His weathered face grew stern. "This level of documented bribery, combined with your medical evidence about the sedated puppies and the falsified euthanasia records." He looked up at them. "I can get you that emergency warrant, but timing will be crucial." Calder nodded, pulling out the lab results he'd compiled. The alphoxylone traces are irrefutable, combined with the microchip data showing these puppies were listed as deceased. He spread out the medical charts. No judge could ignore this. "We'll need to coordinate," Marin said, pulling out her tablet. "My team at Animal Control is ready. I've got 4 officers I trust completely." She showed them a map of Braddock's property. "We'll need to hit all 3 kennel locations simultaneously. Can't give him time to destroy evidence." The feed truck driver, Bobby Whitman, cleared his throat. "I can help with timing. Got a GPS tracker from a buddy in the state police." He held up a small black device. "Next time I make a delivery to Braddock's place, this goes under his waste disposal truck. We'll know exactly when it moves." Judge Mills made notes in his legal pad. "I'll have the warrant ready. But remember, you'll only get one shot at this. Everything needs to be by the book." He looked pointedly at Calder. "Your medical documentation needs to be bulletproof." Calder gestured to the stacks of organized files. "Every test result, every scan, every photo is dated and verified. Chain of custody is documented. I've got 3 other vets ready to testify about the alphoxylone findings." The group huddled around Marin's tablet as she laid out the tactical plan. Red dots marked entry points. Blue showed where evidence was most likely stored. "My team takes the main kennel," she said. "State police will secure the perimeter. Calder, you'll need to be on standby for any medical situations we uncover." "What about backup files?" Bobby asked. "Braddock keeps records in that old silo office." "We'll hit that too," Marini. "Confirmed." "I've got a forensic tech ready for all computers and phones." The energy in the room was electric, months of investigation finally coming together. Judge Mills made calls from Calder's office, setting the legal machinery in motion. Bobby studied delivery schedules, planning the perfect moment to plant the tracker. Calder found himself staring at the photos again. Each one represented a betrayal of trust, a calculated decision to put profit above compassion. He thought of those 12 puppies, now healthy and playing in their enclosure, and how close they'd come to becoming just more numbers in Braddock's cruel system. Marin touched his arm gently. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Just thinking about how long this has been going on, how many animals we couldn't save. But we're stopping it now," she said firmly. "Every piece of evidence, every person in this room, we're finally going to expose the truth." Bobby returned from his truck with more maps, showing the usual routes of Braddock's transport vans. "Once we get that tracker placed, we'll know his patterns. No more midnight disappearances." Judge Mills emerged from the office, looking satisfied. "Warrant's being drawn up. I've got 3 colleagues ready to sign as backup, in case Braddock's people try to block it." They worked through lunch, refining plans, double-checking documentation. Marin's phone buzzed constantly as she coordinated with her trusted officers. The forensics team sent protocols for securing digital evidence. Even the state police liaison checked in, confirming their readiness to move. "Tomorrow morning," Bobby said, checking his delivery schedule. "I'll have legitimate reason to be on his property. The tracker goes on then." Marin nodded. "My teams will be in position the next day. Judge?" "Warrant will be signed and ready," Mills confirmed. "You'll have full authority to search every building, every vehicle, every computer." Calder organized his medical kit, adding extra supplies for any animals they might find. The weight of what they were about to do settled over him. They weren't just taking on one man, but an entire system of corruption and cruelty. "Remember," Judge Mills said as they prepared to disperse, "everything by the book. Document everything. This has to be airtight." They nodded solemnly, each understanding their role in the coming days. Bobby left first, the GPS tracker secure in his truck. Judge Mills gathered the bribery photos, keeping them safe for the warrant application. Marin's tablet buzzed with confirmation messages from her team. The momentum was building, pieces falling into place after months of careful work. Calder watched them go, then walked to check on the puppies, the living proof that had started it all. Their happy barks filled the clinic, a reminder of why this fight mattered. Tomorrow would set everything in motion. For now, they could only prepare and wait, knowing that justice was finally within reach. The sun hadn't yet broken over the horizon when the convoy of vehicles moved silently down the dirt road toward Braddock's property. Calder's truck followed behind Marin's patrol car, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The cool pre-dawn air did nothing to ease the tension knotting his shoulders. Red and blue lights stayed dark as they approached, wanting to maintain the element of surprise as long as possible. Through his windshield, Calder counted the forces assembled: 3 animal control vans with their sides emblazoned with county logos, 4 state police cruisers with officers checking weapons and radios, the forensics team in their white van loaded with specialized equipment, and a mobile veterinary unit he'd called in for backup. The vet techs inside were preparing medical supplies, anticipating the worst. They'd need every resource, every hand, to handle whatever horrors they found inside Braddock's compound. The radio mounted to Calder's dashboard crackled with static before Marin's voice came through with steely determination. "Teams in position. Execute on my mark." The property lay quiet and seemingly innocent in the pre-dawn darkness. Only harsh security lights cast eerie shadows across the main buildings and illuminated the towering grain silo that dominated the landscape like a sentinel. Bobby's GPS tracker had shown regular midnight activity around that silo for the past 2 days, vehicles coming and going during hours when legitimate business would have ceased. "Move in. Now." Marin's command was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. The convoy surged forward as one, lights suddenly blazing to life, bathing the property in disorienting flashes of red and blue. State police took point, their vehicles expertly boxing in all exits to prevent escape. Animal control teams deployed with military precision, fanning out to cover every building, outbuilding, and shed. Calder pulled up near the medical unit, his heart pounding against his ribs as adrenaline flooded his system. The first authoritative shouts of, "Police! Search warrant!" echoed across the property, shattering the early morning silence. Flashlight beams cut through lingering shadows as officers secured the perimeter with practiced efficiency. Calder grabbed his well-worn medical kit from the passenger seat and jogged to join Marin near the silo, his boots kicking up dust in the yard. "Braddock's inside," she said tersely, her face set in grim lines. "Officers are bringing him out now. He was attempting to access a computer when they entered." The kennel owner emerged from the main house, flanked by police officers on both sides. Even in handcuffs, with his expensive pajamas rumpled from the sudden intrusion, Braddock maintained his practiced camera-ready smile. His eyes, however, were cold and calculating. "This is quite unnecessary," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the practiced charm that had fooled so many. "My permits and paperwork are all in perfect order. You're making a serious mistake." Marin didn't even acknowledge him, instead directing her teams to begin the methodical search with hand signals and clipped commands. The forensics unit moved in with ground-penetrating radar equipment, focusing on the suspicious concrete pad beneath the silo. Within minutes, their sensitive equipment detected anomalies that shouldn't exist. "Here," one technician called out, excitement breaking through his professional demeanor. "Large cavity detected, approximately 8 feet down. Definitely not on any building plans we reviewed." Sledgehammers broke through the concrete with rhythmic, echoing blows, revealing a heavy metal hatch that had been deliberately concealed. When they wrenched it open with a protesting groan of metal, the stench that rose from below, a noxious mixture of waste, disease, and death, made even veteran officers gag and cover their mouths. Calder switched on his powerful headlamp and followed Marin down the steep, rusted stairs into darkness. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing rows of stacked cages stretching into shadows, most filled with terrified, cowering animals. Dogs of various breeds with matted fur and infected wounds, cats pressed against the backs of their tiny prisons, even exotic pets that should never have been in private hands, all crammed into spaces barely big enough to turn around. Many showed signs of severe neglect or worse: open sores, infected eyes, and broken spirits. "My God," Marin whispered, her professional facade cracking momentarily. Her camera clicked rapidly in the dim light, documenting everything with methodical precision despite her evident horror. Calder checked the nearest cage where a retriever mix lay motionless except for shallow breathing. The dog was barely responsive, severely dehydrated, its ribs visible through dull, patchy fur. "Get the medical team down here now," he called up through the opening, his voice echoing in the underground chamber. "Multiple critical cases that won't survive transport without immediate intervention." Above ground, Braddock's calm facade finally cracked when he saw animals being brought into the light. "You have no right," he shouted, struggling against his restraints. "This is private property. Those are valuable breeding stock." "This is a crime scene," Marin corrected coldly, emerging from below with evidence bags containing records found in a filing cabinet. She held up her camera with documented proof. "And we have everything we need to make sure you never harm another animal." The rescue operation moved with urgent efficiency. Teams brought animals up into the strengthening morning light, transferring them gently to waiting medical units. Calder worked frantically alongside the veterinary team, triaging the worst cases with practiced hands. Every animal they examined bore witness to systematic cruelty: untreated injuries, severe malnutrition, scars from organized fighting rings. The sun had fully risen, painting the eastern sky in fiery oranges and pinks, when someone shouted in alarm, "Fire! The barn's on fire!" Thick smoke poured from the old wooden structure where financial records and additional documentation were stored. In the chaos that followed, 2 massive dogs suddenly burst from behind the barn, heavily muscled, scarred pit bulls, clearly conditioned for fighting. They charged toward the nearest officers with deadly intent. "Look out!" Calder yelled, but Marin was already moving with instinctive protectiveness. She pushed a young deputy clear as one dog lunged with bared teeth. The momentum carried them both crashing through the barn's weathered side door and into the smoky interior. The fire spread with terrifying speed, fed by decades of old hay, wood treated with flammable preservatives, and who knew what accelerants. Smoke billowed black and thick against the morning sky. Calder heard Marin cough violently from inside, saw her flashlight beam dancing erratically through the thickening haze. "The beam!" she called out, her voice strained and breaking. "It's down! I can't get through!" Her words dissolved into a fit of harsh coughing that tore at Calder's heart. The heat was intense enough to force Calder back several steps, smoke stinging his eyes as he desperately tried to see inside. A massive support beam had indeed collapsed, blocking the main exit and sending up showers of dangerous sparks. Through gaps in the wooden walls, he could see Marin trying to find another way out, her movements becoming increasingly disoriented as oxygen depleted, but the smoke was getting thicker by the second, obscuring everything in toxic clouds. Officers wrestled with the fighting dogs, finally subduing them with catch poles and muzzles, while others called urgently for fire crews on their radios. But the barn was fully involved now, flames greedily consuming the dry timber and reaching hungrily for the sky. And somewhere in that growing inferno, Marin was still trapped, her coughs growing weaker and more sporadic, a sound that chilled Calder's blood despite the overwhelming heat. The wailing sound of approaching sirens mixed with the fire's thunderous roar. But help was still precious minutes away, and the smoke inside was becoming unbearable, thick enough to choke the life from anyone caught within. Through a gap in the walls that widened as fire ate away the structure, Calder caught a glimpse of Marin slumped against a stall divider, her flashlight beam wavering as her strength failed. In the background, secured between 2 officers, Braddock watched the fire with an expression that might have been satisfaction, perhaps even triumph. The evidence was burning to ash before their eyes, but his actions had trapped someone who'd fought tirelessly to expose his cruelty. The flames climbed higher toward the rafters, and Marin's desperate coughs grew more feeble as toxic smoke filled every corner of the burning barn, leaving precious little breathable air. Calder's military training kicked in as he assessed the burning barn. The smoke billowed black and thick, telling him synthetic materials were burning alongside the hay, probably plastic feed bins and equipment. The acrid smell brought back memories of battlefield fires, and the crackling wood sent warning signals through his nervous system. Every second counted now. "Get me a hose," he shouted to the nearest officer, his voice commanding immediate attention. "And find me a feed bucket. Anything metal. Move!" His eyes darted around the barn's exterior, methodically mapping entry points as he'd been trained to do. The main door was blocked by the collapsed beam, flames already licking up its length, but he spotted a low window on the east side, where smoke poured out in rhythmic billows. That meant the fire's heart was elsewhere. This could be his way in. He calculated the risks in seconds, knowing what was at stake. He stripped off his jacket with practiced efficiency, soaking it thoroughly in water from the nearby horse trough. Cold water ran down his arms as he saturated the fabric completely. "When I signal, spray the hose through that window," he called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Several officers tried to stop him, their faces twisted with concern. But he was already moving, determination hardening his features. The heat hit him like a physical blow as he approached the window, radiating in waves that made the air shimmer. Dropping to his belly on the dirt, he pulled the wet jacket over his head and shoulders, feeling the cooling barrier between himself and the scorching air. The smoke was less dense at ground level, but his eyes still stung fiercely, tears streaming down his face. Through the roar of the fire, he could hear Marin's coughing growing weaker, more distant. "Marin," he called out, fighting to project his voice through the din. "Keep making noise, anything at all." A faint tap answered him, metal on wood, 3 deliberate strikes. He crawled toward the sound, using his elbows to pull himself forward across the rough concrete floor. The barn's interior was a nightmarish maze of fallen timbers and burning hay, orange embers floating through the black smoke like fireflies. Every few feet, he had to pat the ground ahead, checking for hot spots that could burn through his clothes and skin. The fighting dogs circled nearby, their silhouettes barely visible through the smoke. They were confused by the chaos, but still aggressive, their training holding even now. Calder spotted a metal feed bucket knocked on its side near a toppled grain bin. Perfect. He grabbed it, knuckles white with tension, scraping it forcefully across the concrete floor. The harsh, grating sound drew the dogs' attention, their ears perking up as they turned toward him. "Now!" he shouted, his throat raw from the smoke. "Hose!" Water sprayed powerfully through the window, creating a temporary barrier between him and the dogs. The sudden hiss of water hitting hot surfaces added to the cacophony as steam billowed upward. The dogs backed away from the spray, snarling but retreating, giving him the opening he needed. His hand found the tranquilizer gun in his medical kit, fingers working on muscle memory. Through the swirling smoke, he made out their shapes. 2 quick shots, perfectly placed despite the conditions. The dogs wobbled on uncertain legs, their aggression melting away as the sedative took effect, then slumped heavily to the ground. Another series of weak taps, fainter now, guided him to Marin. She lay pinned beneath a section of fallen roofing, conscious but struggling to breathe, her face streaked with soot and sweat. The debris wasn't heavy, but it had her trapped awkwardly against a stall divider. The wood splintered around her. "Hold still," he ordered, voice muffled through his wet jacket. His hands moved quickly, professionally assessing the debris and her position. "Can you feel your legs? Any numbness or sharp pain?" She nodded weakly, a violent coughing fit shaking her frame before she could answer. "Trapped, not crushed. Left ankle, might be broken." The fire was spreading faster now, eating through the barn's old wood with hungry, popping sounds. Embers rained down around them as sections of the ceiling gave way. Heat pressed down on them like a physical weight, making each movement an effort. Calder braced himself against the stall and heaved with everything he had, muscles straining as he lifted the roofing section just enough. Marin dragged herself clear with a pained gasp, but her leg buckled immediately when she tried to stand, confirming his suspicion about her ankle. "Lean on me," he said firmly, pulling her arm across his shoulders and wrapping his arm around her waist. Her body trembled against his, either from shock or smoke inhalation. Probably both. They were halfway to the window, moving through a gauntlet of falling debris, when one of the dogs, not fully sedated, lunged suddenly from the smoke. Calder didn't have time to reach for the tranq gun. The dog's teeth sank deep into his calf as he instinctively pushed Marin behind him, shielding her with his body. Pain flared sharp and hot through his leg, the sensation so intense that his vision briefly tunneled. Blood soaked warm through his jeans, but he stayed upright through sheer willpower. He swung the metal bucket with all his might, catching the dog across the muzzle with a sickening thud. It released his leg with a yelp, stumbling back into the smoke. "Almost there," he grunted through clenched teeth, limping heavily now as they moved toward the rectangle of light that promised escape. Each step sent fresh waves of pain shooting up his leg, but he focused on moving forward. The smoke was thickening rapidly, making each breath a desperate struggle. Marin's steps grew increasingly unsteady, her weight becoming heavier against him as she fought to stay conscious. 5 feet from the window, she sagged against him entirely, her head lolling forward as unconsciousness claimed her. Calder gathered his remaining strength and half-carried, half-dragged her the final distance, his injured leg threatening to give out with every step. Hands reached urgently through the window, multiple officers calling encouragement as they pulled Marin's limp form to safety. Then they reached for him, their faces masks of concern visible through the smoke. He collapsed onto cool grass 30 feet from the barn, lungs burning fiercely as he gulped clean air in desperate heaves. His entire body shook with the effort of breathing, each cough a new agony. Paramedics swarmed them immediately, their voices calm but urgent as they assessed injuries. Through watering eyes, he saw fire trucks arriving in a blur of red lights, their powerful sirens drowning out all other sounds as firefighters deployed with practiced efficiency. As oxygen masks were fitted over their faces, the cool, life-giving oxygen flowing into his tortured lungs, Calder's thoughts flashed unbidden to his own clinic. To that night years ago, when another fire had taken Rebecca, his wife. The memory of those flames overlaid the current scene with painful clarity, making his chest tighten with old grief. He remembered how helpless he'd felt then, arriving too late to do anything but watch. But this time was different. This time he'd gotten there in time. The evidence they'd gathered was already safe, copied and distributed to multiple agencies, including the State Veterinary Board. The rescued animals were documented and evacuated to emergency shelters. Even if Braddock burned everything else to ash, even if he demolished every building on the property, he couldn't hide the truth anymore. The dam had broken. Marin stirred beside him on the grass, coughing harshly but conscious, her eyes finding his with relief. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining and squeezing weakly in silent communication. Together they watched firefighters battle the blaze through the fog of exhaustion, their world narrowed to the simple miracle of breathing, of survival. The wound in his leg throbbed mercilessly, blood seeping through the temporary bandage as paramedics prepared to transport them. The pain reminded him of all they'd risked, of how close they'd come to losing everything. But as paramedics began treating the deep bite, cleaning and assessing the damage, Calder felt no regret. Some things were worth the pain, worth any price you had to pay. The truth was one of those things. The morning after the fire, Marin's GPS tracker started blinking rapidly on their monitors. The signal came from an isolated spot 20 miles outside town, far from any registered facilities. Calder's leg still ached from the dog bite as he climbed into his truck, following the state investigation team down dusty back roads. The smell hit them first, acrid and chemical. Through a break, in the tree line, they found a makeshift dump site carved into a dry creek bed. Marin stepped carefully down the eroded bank, her camera clicking steadily. The ground was littered with hundreds of charred collars, their tags melted into twisted lumps. Dark patches of ash spread across the dirt like storm clouds. "Over here," called one of the investigators, lifting a partially burned ledger from beneath some brush. The pages were crisp with heat damage, but columns of dates and numbers remained legible. Each entry matched a day when Braddock's waste trucks had made their mysterious detours. Calder knelt, despite his injured leg, examining a pile of weathered metal tags. "These match the serial numbers from those first puppies we found," he said quietly. "He's been doing this for years." The retired judge arrived as they were cataloging evidence, his face grim. He carried a thick folder of documents, records he'd finally forced the county to release. "Every falsified permit," he explained, spreading papers across the hood of his car. "Look at the signature block." The same name appeared on form after form: Trevor Mills, county permitting officer. His hurried scrawl approved every irregular transport, every missing inspection report. Bank records showed regular payments from Braddock's shell companies flowing into offshore accounts. "Mills rolled over completely once we had proof," the judge said. "Gave up everything, dates, locations, the whole operation. Said Braddock told him it was just business, moving excess inventory quietly to avoid fees." "Inventory," Marin spat the word. "Those were living creatures." Their radios crackled. Braddock had been spotted loading his private plane at the county airstrip. Before they could respond, another call. State deputies had already blocked the runway. Braddock was heading south in his truck toward his main stockyard. Marin coordinated with the deputies, while Calder followed in his vehicle. They found Braddock's truck parked haphazardly by the loading chute, its driver's door still open. The stockyard's metal gates creaked in the wind. Calder spotted him first, a figure in an expensive suit now stained with dirt, trying to climb the far fence. "It's over, Braddock," he called out, his voice carrying across the empty pens. Braddock turned, his usual polish cracked. Sweat darkened his collar as he backed against the fence. "You don't understand," he snarled. "This is business, survival. You think anyone cares about a few mutts? The market demands efficiency." "Efficiency?" Calder's calm cut through Braddock's bluster. He pulled out his phone, displaying photos from the dump site. "Is that what you call burying them alive? Burning the evidence?" "You're destroying years of work." Braddock's voice rose hysterically. "My reputation." "Your reputation was built on cruelty," Marin said, emerging from between the pens with her badge displayed. "And lies." Braddock lunged toward a gap in the fencing, but deputies were already there. The click of handcuffs echoed off metal gates as they secured him. He struggled and cursed as they led him toward the waiting patrol cars. "This isn't over," he shouted over his shoulder. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." But his threats sounded hollow now, drowned out by approaching sirens. More patrol cars arrived, their lights painting the dusty stockyard in red and blue. Investigators swarmed the office building, emerging with boxes of files. Calder watched as Braddock was placed in a patrol car, his silver hair disheveled, his facade of power finally shattered. The man's eyes met his through the window, wild with rage and disbelief that his empire could crumble so completely. The late afternoon sun streamed through the newly installed windows of Calder's clinic, casting warm squares of light across the freshly painted walls. 6 weeks had passed since Braddock's arrest, and the bite mark on Calder's calf had finally healed to a pale crescent. He sat at his desk, architectural blueprints spread before him, while Sable, the smallest of the rescued puppies, dozed contentedly in his lap. The puppy's gentle weight felt like an anchor of hope. Her black fur had grown in thick and glossy, erasing all traces of that terrible night when he'd pulled her from the earth. Every so often she would twitch in her sleep, paws paddling against some dream adventure, and Calder would pause in his work to scratch behind her ears. He studied the blueprints for the new rescue wing, tracing the lines with his finger. Where the old storage area had been, there would now be recovery kennels, a quarantine space, and a proper surgical suite. The insurance money hadn't covered everything, but anonymous donations had poured in once the story broke. People wanted to help, to be part of something good rising from such darkness. The clinic's front door chimed, and Sable's head popped up, her tail immediately wagging. Marin stepped in, carrying a thick manila envelope and wearing a smile that made Calder's heart skip. She looked different these days, lighter somehow, as if bringing down Braddock had lifted a weight she'd carried for years. "You're going to want to see this," she said, pulling up a chair beside his desk. Her green eyes sparkled with satisfaction as she spread out official-looking documents. The district attorney just filed the final charges. Braddock's facing 12 felony counts of animal cruelty, plus fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder for the fire. Calder let out a long breath. "How many years?" "If they get everything to stick, 20 to 25. His lawyer's trying to plea bargain, but the DA isn't budging." Marin pulled out another paper. "And Mills, the permitting officer? He resigned yesterday. Turned in his pension, everything. Word is he's cooperating fully to avoid jail time." Sable stretched and hopped down from Calder's lap, padding over to greet Marin with enthusiastic kisses. Marin laughed, scratching the puppy's chest. "She's looking wonderful. How are the others doing?" "All adopted," Calder said, smiling. "That family from Austin took 3 of them. The Hendersons have 2. Even Judge Morris took one. Says having a puppy makes him feel young again." "And this little princess?" Marin asked, though she already knew the answer. "Staying right here," Calder said firmly. "She's earned her place as clinic mascot." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Sable investigate a dust mote dancing in the sunbeam. The quiet between them felt natural now, earned through long nights of vigilance and shared purpose. "Thank you," Calder said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "For believing me when no one else would, for standing firm when everything went sideways." Marin met his gaze steadily. "You did the same for me. All those years I was gathering evidence, hitting walls. You gave me the breakthrough I needed." She reached out, her hand finding his across the desk. "We make a good team." The touch sent warmth through Calder's chest, different from the burning rage that had driven him through the investigation. This was softer, full of possibility. In Marin's eyes, he saw the same quiet understanding. The knowledge that their connection had been forged in fire, but could grow into something more. Sable flopped down between their chairs with a contented sigh, as if giving her approval. Outside, birds sang in the oak trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of new beginnings through the open window. The blueprint for the rescue wing seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Not just a building plan, but a promise that good could triumph, that justice could prevail, that new life could rise from the darkest ashes.